The diplomatic ship Harmony's Edge moved through space like a silver needle threading through black cloth. Inside the main conference room, 12 different species sat around a curved table, their voices mixing in the universal translators. The peace talks had gone well so far, but Zaraka kept her 4 arms folded tightly across her chest, her silver scales catching the overhead lights. She watched the humans at the far end of the table with careful eyes. 20 years had passed since the war ended, but she still remembered the day her family died. The human military strike had been a mistake, they said later. Her parents and younger brother had been researchers, not soldiers. But mistakes didn't bring back the dead. Jake Morrison sat 3 seats away from the nearest human delegate, close enough to hear their discussions, but far enough to avoid the political games. As a planetary explorer for the Galactic Survey Corps, he wasn't supposed to be at these talks at all. But someone needed to brief the delegates about Kepler 442b, their destination planet. Someone who had actually walked on alien soil and knew what to expect. He glanced at the Veltar diplomat across the room. He tried to introduce himself on the first day, but she'd looked right through him like he was made of glass. Her people had good reason to hate humans, he knew. The war had hurt everyone, but the Veltar had lost entire research colonies to human bombs. The ship shuddered slightly, and Captain Tora's voice came through the speakers. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored delegates, we're beginning our approach to Kepler 442b. Please secure any loose items and prepare for standard orbital insertion. Zara Kaithak gathered her data tablets with practiced efficiency. The sooner they reached the planet, the sooner she could complete her mission and return home. She had come here to negotiate trade agreements, nothing more. The Veltar needed access to rare minerals found on human-controlled worlds, and the humans wanted Veltar biotechnology. It was business, not friendship. Jake stood and walked to the large viewing window as the planet came into view. Kepler 442b hung in space like a blue and white marble, its 2 suns casting double shadows across the continents. He'd studied the survey reports, but seeing it with his own eyes was different. The northern continent looked peaceful from orbit, covered in forests and lakes. The southern continent was mostly desert, with mountain ranges that reached up like fingers toward the sky. Beautiful, isn't it? Said Dr. Kim, the human cultural attach, joining him at the window. Yeah, but looks can fool you, Jake replied. The northern continent has winter storms that can freeze you solid in minutes. The southern desert has heat that can cook you before noon, and we still don't know much about the wildlife. Dr. Kim laughed. Always the pessimist. That's why they sent you, I suppose. Someone needs to keep us diplomats grounded in reality. The ship shuddered again, harder this time. Emergency lights began flashing red, and Captain Torres' voice returned. Less calm than before, all personnel to emergency stations. We're experiencing engine failure. This is not a drill. Zara Kefek's 4 arms moved quickly, securing her equipment and checking her emergency pack. Her species had survived countless dangers by being prepared for anything. She'd learned from childhood that the universe was full of things that wanted to kill you, and being ready was the difference between life and death. Jake was already moving toward the emergency station assigned to him. As a survey specialist, he'd been through emergency drills on dozens of ships, but this felt different. The ship's vibrations were wrong, and the emergency lights were flashing in a pattern he'd never seen before. All delegates to evacuation. Pods, Captain Torres announced. Engine containment is failing. We have approximately 8 minutes before total system failure. The conference room emptied quickly as beings from 12 different species rushed toward the pod bays. Zara Kaithek found herself moving with the crowd, her scaled feet gripping the deck plates as the ship lurched to one side. Around her, other delegates struggled with the artificial gravity fluctuations. She reached Pod Bay 7. Just as another group of delegates filled Pod Bay 6, the automated system guided her to Pod 7 Alpha, but as she approached, she saw Jake Morrison climbing into the same pod. Her silver scales darkened with frustration. Find another pod, she told him, her voice cold. This is my assigned pod, Jake replied, showing her his emergency card. Look, I don't like this either, but we don't have time to argue. The ship shook violently, and sparks flew from a control panel near the pod bay entrance. Other evacuation pods were launching automatically, their occupants sealed inside and ejected into space. Zarakithek looked at the remaining pods. Pod 7 Beta's hatch was sealed shut, red lights indicating a malfunction. Pod 7 Gamma had a crack in its hull. Pod 7 Alpha is the only one left, Jake said, already strapping himself in. We can hate each other after we survive. Zarakithek's logical mind warred with her emotions. She'd promised herself never to trust a human, never to depend on them for anything. But the ship was dying around them, and Pod 7 Alpha was their only chance. She climbed into the pod, her forearms working quickly to secure the safety harnesses. The pod's interior was designed for 2 occupants, but it was still cramped with both of them inside. Jake's human smell filled the small space, and she had to fight the urge to recoil. Auto launch in 30 seconds, the pod's computer announced. Through the small porthole, Zarakithek watched the Harmony's edges hull buckle and twist. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers along the engine section. Other evacuation pods were already scattered across space, their emergency beacons flashing. 10 seconds to launch. Jake checked his harness one more time. Hold on, this is going to be rough. The pod ejected from the dying ship with a force that pressed them both deep into their seats. Zarakithek felt her stomach drop as they tumbled through space, the pod stabilizers struggling to control their spin. Through the porthole, she watched the Harmony's edge explode in a brilliant flash of light, their pod's emergency systems activated, scanning for the nearest safe landing site. Kepler 442b grew larger in the porthole as they fell toward the planet's surface. The northern continent's forests looked peaceful from space, but Zarakithek knew they were heading for trouble. Atmospheric entry in 2 minutes, the computer announced. Brace for impact. The pod began to heat up as they hit the planet's atmosphere. Outside, the sky turned orange and red as friction burned around their hull. Jake gripped his harness and tried to read the landing trajectory on the small screen. We're coming in too fast, he said. The landing thrusters aren't strong enough. Zarakithek's scaled hands worked over the pod's controls, her scientific training taking over. The atmospheric density is different than the computer calculated. We can adjust the entry angle, but only slightly. They worked together without speaking, their hands moving over the controls as the ground rushed up to meet them. Trees and lakes flashed past the porthole, growing larger every second. The pod's emergency parachutes deployed with a sharp crack, slowing their descent but not enough. They hit the ground hard, the pod bouncing twice before sliding to a stop against a cluster of tall trees. Emergency foam deployed around them, cushioning the impact but filling the pod with white chemical smell. For a long moment neither of them moved. Then Jake groaned and tried to sit up, his left shoulder obviously dislocated. Zarakithek flexed her forearms, wincing as pain shot through her left secondary arm. Are you functional? She asked, her voice strictly professional. I'll live, Jake replied, though his face was pale with pain. You? Minor fracture. Nothing critical. She was already checking the pod systems, her scientific mind cataloging their situation. Emergency beacon is damaged, food supplies scattered during impact. External temperature dropping rapidly. Jake managed to pop the pod's hatch, and cold air rushed in. Outside, alien trees swayed in a wind that carried the promise of snow. The twin suns were setting, casting long shadows across the forest floor. We need shelter, Jake said. This planet's nights can kill you. Zarakithek climbed out of the pod, her scaled skin already sensing the temperature drop. She'd survived worse conditions, but never with a human. Never with someone she couldn't trust. They gathered what supplies they could find, working in silence as the first snowflakes began to fall. The emergency shelter was intact, but when they deployed it, both of them realized the problem. The shelter was designed for one person, with a single survival pod barely large enough for 2. We'll take turns, Zarakithek said, though she knew it was impossible. The temperature was dropping too fast for anyone to survive outside. Jake looked at the Shelter, then at her, then at the darkening sky. I don't think that's going to work. The wind picked up and snow began falling harder. Around them, the alien forest grew quiet, except for the whisper of wind through strange leaves. Somewhere in the distance, something howled. HFY stared at the tiny shelter, then at Jake Morrison. She'd promised never to trust a human, never to depend on them. But the alternative was freezing to death in an alien forest. One night, she said finally, just until the storm passes. Jake nodded, understanding the weight of what she was offering. One night. But as they prepared to enter the shelter together, both of them knew that one night might change everything. The survival shelter was barely large enough for one person, let alone two beings from different species. HFY pressed herself against the far wall. Her forearms folded tightly as she tried to make herself as small as possible. Jake Morrison sat near the entrance, his injured shoulder held carefully against his chest. The shelter's heating system hummed quietly, but it wasn't enough. Outside, the wind howled through the alien trees and snow piled up against the shelter's walls. The temperature display showed numbers that made both of them worry. It was getting colder faster than either had expected. The heating unit is struggling, HFY said, checking the small control panel. It's designed for one person, not two. Jake nodded, his breath already visible in the cold air. How long do you think it will last? At this rate, maybe 4 hours before it fails completely. They sat in awkward silence, listening to the storm outside. The shelter creaked and groaned as wind buffeted it from all sides. Snow began to seep through small gaps in the walls, creating tiny white piles. On the floor, Jake's human body wasn't built for extreme cold the way HFY's was. Her silver scales provided natural insulation, and her forearms helped her maintain body heat more efficiently. But even she could feel the cold creeping in through the shelter's walls. "Tell me about your people's cold weather gear," Jake said through chattering teeth. "Maybe we can improvise something." HFY looked at him carefully. His lips were already turning blue, and his hands shook as he tried to adjust his jacket. "Veltar physiology is different. We don't need as much external heating." "Lucky you," Jake muttered, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. The heating unit made a strange clicking sound, then went quiet for several seconds before starting again. Both of them knew what that meant. The system was failing, and they were running out of time. Jake tried to stay awake, but the cold was making him drowsy. His eyelids grew heavy, and his breathing became shallow. HFY watched him with growing concern. She'd seen enough medical cases to know the signs of hypothermia. "Morrison," she said sharply, "stay awake." Jake's eyes opened, but they were unfocused. "I'm fine, just resting." "No, you're not fine. You're entering the early stages of hypothermia." She moved closer, her medical training overriding her personal feelings. "Your body temperature is dropping too fast." "What do you suggest?" Jake asked, though his words were slurred. HFY stared at him, her logical mind warring with 20 years of hatred. She knew what had to be done, but it went against everything she'd promised herself. She'd sworn never to trust a human, never to get close to one, but Jake Morrison was dying, and she was the only one who could save him. "We need to share body heat," she said finally. "It's the only way to keep you alive." Jake looked at her through half-closed eyes. "You don't have to do that. I know you hate humans." "I hate what humans did to my family," HFY corrected. "But I'm not going to let you die." She moved closer, her forearms wrapping around Jake's shivering form. Her scales were warm against his cold skin, and she could feel his heart beating rapidly as his body tried to generate heat. It was the first time she'd touched a human in 20 years. Jake's shivering gradually stopped as her warmth spread through his body. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive the night." As the hours passed, the heating unit continued to fail. The temperature inside the shelter dropped steadily and snow began to accumulate in the corners. HFY held Jake closer, using her forearms to wrap around him completely. In his semi-conscious state, Jake began to talk. The words came. Out in a jumbled stream, fragments of memories and thoughts that the cold had loosened from his mind. Emma always said I was too stubborn, he mumbled. Said I'd rather freeze than ask for help. Who is Emma? Zarek asked, though she wasn't sure why she cared. My sister. She was a medic during the war. Always patching people up, human and alien alike. Jake's voice was dreamy, distant. She died trying to save Veltar civilians during the battle. Of Kepler 7. Zarek's arms tightened around him involuntarily. Kepler 7 was where her family had died. Her parents had been conducting research there when the human military mistook their facility for a weapons installation. She kept saying the war was stupid, Jake continued. Said we were all just people, trying to survive in a big, dangerous universe. Didn't matter if you had scales or skin or tentacles. What happened to her? The bomb went off in the medical station. She was trying to evacuate the wounded when the building collapsed. Jake's voice broke slightly. I should have been there. Should have helped her. Zarek found herself listening intently. She'd never heard a human talk about the war this way, with regret instead of pride. All the human soldiers she'd known had been proud of their victories, even the ones that killed innocent people. That's why I joined the Survey Corps, Jake went on. Figured maybe I could help explore new worlds instead of destroying them. Maybe make up for what we did. You can't make up for the dead, Zarek said quietly. No, but maybe I can help prevent more deaths. Maybe I can prove that humans can be something other than killers. The heating unit made one last clicking sound and went silent. The temperature began dropping faster, and both of them knew they were in serious trouble. Outside, the storm had grown worse, and the wind was strong enough to shake the entire shelter. We need to stay awake, Zarek said. If we fall asleep, we might not wake up. Jake nodded, though his eyes were heavy. Tell me about your family. What were they like? Zarek hesitated. She'd never talked about her family with anyone, let alone a human. But something about Jake's story, about his sister's sacrifice, made her want to share. My father was a botanist, she said slowly. He studied how plants adapted to different environments. My mother was a geologist. They worked together, trying to understand how life could survive on harsh worlds. What about your brother? Keth wanted to be a pilot. He was only 15 when he died, but he could fly anything. He used to say he wanted to explore the galaxy, see all the places our parents studied. Jake was quiet for a moment. They sound like good people. They were. They believed in learning, in understanding. They thought knowledge could bring different species together. Zarek's voice hardened. They were wrong. Maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe they were just ahead of their time. The shelter creaked ominously as a particularly strong gust of wind hit it. Snow was now falling through several gaps in the walls, and ice was forming on the inside surfaces. Both of them knew they were running out of time. We need to do something, Jake said. This shelter isn't going to hold much longer. Zarek used her scientific training to analyze their situation. The shelter was failing, the heating was gone, and the storm outside was getting worse. But she'd noticed something during their conversation. When she held Jake closer, both of their body temperatures stabilized. There's something about our combined body heat, she said. It's more efficient than either of us alone. Jake looked at her with clearer eyes. What do you mean? I mean, we're going to have to stay very close together if we want to survive until morning. Closer than either of us is comfortable with. Jake understood immediately. I know you don't trust me. I know this is hard for you. It's not about trust, Zarek said, though they both knew it was exactly about trust. It's about survival. She wrapped all four of her arms around him, pressing her scaled body against his human one. Jake put his good arm around her, and they held each other as the storm raged outside. Just until morning, Zarek said, echoing her words from earlier. Just until morning, Jake agreed, but as they lay there in the failing shelter, sharing warmth and listening to each other's breathing, both of them began to realize that morning might bring more than just survival. It might bring understanding. The storm continued to rage outside. But inside the tiny shelter, two beings from different worlds held each other against the cold and began to see past 20 years of hatred and fear. Dawn came slowly to the alien forest, with pale light filtering through the strange trees outside their shelter. HFY woke first, her forearms still wrapped around Jake Morrison. During the night they had pressed closer together for warmth, and now she could feel his steady breathing against her scaled chest. Jake stirred as the light grew brighter. His shoulder still ached from the crash, but the rest of his body felt warm for the first time since they'd landed. He started to move away, then stopped when he realized how cold the air was. "The heating system is completely dead," HFY said, checking the control panel. "And the storm damaged the shelter's insulation." Jake sat up carefully, wincing as his injured shoulder protested. "We can't stay here another night, we'll freeze to death." Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world covered in white snow. The alien trees looked like crystal sculptures in the morning light, their branches heavy with ice. But the beauty hid a deadly truth. The temperature was still dropping. "We need to find better shelter," HFY said, gathering their scattered supplies. "Somewhere with natural protection from the cold?" Jake stood and tested his shoulder. It was still painful, but he could move it enough to be useful. "I studied the survey maps before we crashed. There are some rock formations about 10 kilometers south, might be caves." 10 kilometers in this snow will be difficult," HFY observed. "But staying here means certain death." They packed what they could carry and stepped out into the frozen forest. The snow was knee-deep in places, and the wind cut through their clothes like knives. Jake's human body struggled with the cold. But HFY's scales provided better protection. As they walked, Jake noticed strange markings on some of the trees. They looked like symbols, carved deep into the bark. "Are those natural?" he asked. HFY examined the markings with her scientific eye. "No, these are artificial. Made by intelligence, not nature." But the survey report said this planet was uninhabited. The survey reports were wrong. She traced one of the symbols with her finger. "These markings are old, but not ancient. Maybe 50 years, maybe less." They followed the markings deeper into the forest, using them as guideposts through the snow. The symbols appeared regularly on trees and rocks, forming a clear path toward the south. Jake's survival training told him to be careful of following unknown paths, but they had few options. As they walked, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller and stranger, their branches forming intricate patterns overhead. The snow became deeper, and the temperature continued to drop. Both of them knew they were running out of time. "There," HFY said, pointing ahead. Rock formations. The path led them to a canyon system carved into dark stone. The walls rose high on both sides, blocking the wind and creating natural shelter. More importantly, the canyon contained structures that were clearly not natural. "Buildings," Jake breathed. Staring at the ruins half buried in snow and ice, the structures were unlike anything either of them had seen before. They were built into the canyon walls themselves, with smooth curves and strange angles that seemed to flow like frozen water. Most of them were covered in ice, but some still showed signs of their original construction. "This is a major discovery," HFY said, her scientific mind taking over. "An unknown civilization on a planet that was supposed to be empty." Jake was more practical. "Right now, I'm more interested in whether these buildings can keep us alive." They explored the ruins carefully, looking for a structure that might provide shelter. Most of the buildings were too damaged or too filled with ice to be useful. But deep in the canyon, they found a large structure that seemed more intact than the others. "This one has an opening," Jake said, pointing to what looked like a doorway carved into the rock. HFY approached the entrance cautiously. Her forearms moved over the strange symbols carved around the doorway. "These markings are similar to the ones on the trees, but more complex." Jake stepped closer to examine the symbols. As he did, something began to glow softly inside the doorway. Both of them froze, unsure whether to advance or retreat. "Motion sensors," HFY said after a moment. "The building is responding to our presence." "Is that good or bad?" Jake asked, Before she could answer, mechanical sounds echoed from inside the building. Something was waking up after a long sleep, and it didn't sound friendly. "We should leave," Zarakathek said, but it was too late. 3 metal creatures emerged from the darkness inside the building. They moved on 6 legs each, with glowing eyes and weapons that hummed with energy. The creatures looked like mechanical spiders, but the size of large dogs. "Defense systems," Jake said, recognizing the threat immediately. "Ancient, but still active." The mechanical guardians scanned them with beams of red light, then began to advance. The weapons on their backs swiveled to target both Jake and Zarakathek. "Run!" Jake shouted, but the creatures were faster than they looked. The first Guardian fired a bolt of energy that missed Jake by inches, leaving a smoking hole in the canyon wall. The second Guardian moved to block their escape route, while the third circled around behind them. Zarakathek used her 4 arms to grab rocks and throw them at the nearest Guardian. The rocks bounced off its metal shell, but the impacts caused it to stumble slightly. Jake picked up a larger stone and hurled it at the Guardian's glowing eyes. The rock struck true, and the Guardian's vision systems flickered. But the other 2 Guardians were still active, and more mechanical sounds echoed from deeper in the building. "This way," Zarakathek called, pointing to a narrow passage between the canyon walls. They ran through the passage as energy bolts exploded around them. The passage was too narrow for the Guardians to follow, but Jake could hear them trying to find another route. The passage opened into a natural cave system that extended deep into the rock. The walls were smooth and warm, suggesting geothermal activity. More importantly, the cave provided shelter from both the cold and the mechanical Guardians. "I think we lost them," Jake said, breathing heavily. Zarakathek was examining the cave walls with interest. "Look at these formations. This cave system is natural, but it's been modified." The cave walls showed signs of tool marks, as if someone had expanded and shaped the natural chambers. Deeper in the cave, they found evidence of habitation, fire pits, sleeping areas, and storage chambers carved into the rock. "Someone lived here," Jake observed, "recently." "The same people who built the structures outside," Zarakathek agreed. "But where are they now?" As they explored deeper, they heard a sound that made both of them freeze. It was a low humming, like machinery running deep underground. The sound was coming from the deepest part of the cave system. "More defense systems?" Jake asked. "No, this is different. This sounds like life support." They followed the sound deeper into the caves, using Jake's emergency light to guide them. The walls grew warmer as they descended, and the air became more humid. Whatever was making the sound was big, and it was still active. The passage opened into a large chamber that took their breath away. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols they'd seen outside, but these were glowing with soft light. In the center of the chamber were several raised platforms, each with what looked like sleeping alcoves built for 2 occupants. "It's some kind of shelter system," Zarakathek said, moving to examine the nearest platform. "But why are they built for pairs?" Jake approached another platform and noticed that the alcoves were warm to the touch. "They're heated. And look at this, there are controls built into the sides." Zarakathek ran her hands over the controls, her scientific mind working to understand the alien technology. "These symbols dot their instructions. This is a survival facility, built by who? The same people who created the defense systems. They built this place as a refuge, somewhere safe to wait out dangerous conditions." Jake examined the sleeping alcoves more closely. Each one was clearly designed for 2 occupants, with controls that seemed to monitor life signs and adjust conditions automatically. "Why pairs, though? Why not individual shelters?" "Maybe their species required pair bonding for survival," Zarakathek suggested. "Or maybe they discovered that 2 beings could survive better together than alone." A sound from the cave entrance made both of them turn. The mechanical Guardians had found another route, and their glowing eyes were visible in the darkness of the passage. "They're coming," Jake said. "We need to figure out how to work these things." Zarakathek's 4 arms moved over the controls rapidly. The symbols are complex, but I think I understand the basic concepts. These alcoves are designed to create a protective environment for two occupants. Can we activate them? I think so, but... She hesitated, looking at the alcoves designed for pairs. We would have to share one. The system won't work with just one person. Jake looked at the approaching guardians, then at the warm alcoves. After the night they'd spent pressed together for survival, the idea of sharing the alien shelter seemed less impossible. We've shared worse conditions, he said. Zarek nodded, her decision made. Help me with these controls. We don't have much time. As the mechanical guardians entered the chamber, their weapons charging with deadly energy, Jake and Zarek worked together to activate the alien survival system. The alcoves began to glow. Inside the alien alcove, Jake and Zarek lay pressed together as the strange technology hummed around them. The space was even smaller than their emergency shelter had been, forcing them into closer contact than either was comfortable with. But unlike the night before, this wasn't just about sharing body heat. The alien systems were scanning them, reading their vital signs and brain patterns. Soft lights pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats, and the walls around them displayed flowing patterns of symbols that seemed to respond to their thoughts and emotions. It's reading us, Zarek said, her voice tight with concern. This technology is more advanced than anything either of our species has developed. Jake felt strange sensations flowing through his mind, as if something was gently probing his thoughts. What is it looking for? I think it's trying to understand our relationship. These alcoves were designed for bonded pairs, beings who trust each other completely. Outside their protective barrier, the mechanical guardians had stopped attacking. They stood motionless around the chamber, their glowing eyes fixed on the alcove. It was as if they were waiting for something. What happens if the system decides we're not compatible? Jake asked. Zarek studied the flowing symbols on the walls around them. Her scientific training helped her recognize patterns in the alien writing, but the meaning was still unclear. I don't know, but I don't think we want to find out. The scanning intensified, and both of them felt the alien technology digging deeper into their minds. It was looking for something specific, some sign that they belonged together in this survival system. Jake tried to relax and let the system do its work, but it was difficult. The technology was touching memories he'd kept buried for years, the guilt over his sister's death, his failures during the war, his desperate hope that humans could be better than their past. Zarek was fighting the scan more actively. Her forearms were tense, and her scales had darkened with stress. The system was probing the walls she'd built around her heart, the barriers that protected her from the pain of losing her family. You're resisting it, Jake said. I can feel your tension. I don't like having my mind invaded, Zarek replied. This technology could be dangerous. More dangerous than freezing to death? More dangerous than those guardians? The alien system pulsed brighter, and the scanning became more insistent. The symbols on the walls began flashing in patterns that hurt to look at. Outside the alcove, the mechanical guardians started moving again, their weapons charging with energy. It's not working, Zarek said. The system is rejecting us. Jake felt the truth of her words in the growing tension around them. The alien technology had been designed for beings who trusted each other without reservation, who could open their minds completely to their partner. But Zarek's hatred of humans and Jake's own guilt were creating barriers that the system couldn't overcome. We have to let it in, Jake said. Both of us completely. I can't, Zarek said, her voice small. I've spent 20 years building walls to protect myself. I don't know how to tear them down. Then we're going to die in here. The truth of that statement hung between them as the alien system continued to probe their minds. The guardians outside were raising their weapons, and the protective barrier around the alcove was beginning to flicker. Jake made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation. He stopped fighting the alien scan and opened his mind completely, letting the technology see everything. His memories of the war, his guilt over Emma's death, his desperate hope for redemption. The system responded immediately, flowing through. His thoughts like water through a broken dam. Jake felt exposed and vulnerable, but also strangely relieved. For the first time in years, he wasn't carrying his burdens alone. Zara Kaithek felt the change in Jake's mental state through their shared connection. The alien technology was showing her his memories, his emotions, his true feelings about the war and its aftermath. She saw his sister Emma working frantically to save Veltar civilians, saw Jake's horror when he learned of her death, saw his years of trying to make amends. "You really did lose someone you loved," she whispered. "Just, like you did," Jake replied. "We're both carrying the same pain." The alien system pulsed with approval as it detected the growing connection between them, but it needed more. It needed Zara Kaithek to open herself as completely as Jake had. She looked at Jake's face, so close to hers in the cramped alcove. His eyes held no deception, no hidden agenda. The alien technology had stripped away all his defenses, leaving only truth. For the first time since her family's death, Zara Kaithek felt the possibility of trust. Slowly, carefully, she began to lower her mental barriers. The alien system flowed into her mind like warm water, carrying her memories and emotions into the shared space with Jake. She felt his shock as he experienced her family's death through her eyes, felt his genuine sorrow for her loss, but the system showed him more than just her pain. It showed him her parents' dream of unity between species, her brother's excitement about exploring the galaxy, her own buried hope that someday the killing would stop and different races could work together. "Your family wasn't wrong," Jake said, his voice full of emotion. "They were just ahead of their time." The alien technology responded to their growing trust with waves of approval. The symbols on the walls shifted from warning red to gentle blue, and the protective barrier around their alcove strengthened. Outside, the mechanical guardians powered down their weapons and returned to their waiting positions, but the system wasn't finished with them yet. As their mental barriers dissolved completely, Jake and Zara Kaithek found themselves experiencing each other's memories as if they were their own. Jake felt the terror of watching human ships destroy Zara Kaithek's home while she experienced his desperate search through the rubble of the medical station where Emma had died. They shared each other's nightmares, each other's guilt, each other's pain. But they also shared something else, the deep longing for peace that both had carried in secret for 20 years. "I never wanted to hate humans," Zara Kaithek admitted, her voice breaking. "But it was easier than facing the grief." "I know," Jake said. "I've been running from my own guilt the same way." The alien technology wrapped around them like a warm embrace, creating a safe space where they could finally confront the emotions they'd both been hiding. In the shared mental space, they began to heal wounds that had festered for 2 decades. Jake saw Zara Kaithek's family not as distant casualties of war, but as real people with hopes and dreams. Her father's botanical research, her mother's geological surveys, her brother's dreams of being a pilot. They became as real to him as his own memories. Zara Kaithek experienced Emma's medical work through Jake's eyes, seeing how his sister had risked everything to save both human and alien lives. She felt Jake's pride in Emma's courage and his devastating guilt over failing to protect her. "She died trying to save my people," Zara Kaithek said. "And my family died because humans couldn't tell the difference between scientists and soldiers. The war made monsters of all of us," Jake replied. "But maybe we can be something better." The alien system pulsed with satisfaction as their minds fully synchronized. The technology had been designed by a species that understood something important about survival, that trust and cooperation were more powerful than any weapon or shelter. As the mental connection deepened, Jake and Zara Kaithek began to understand the true purpose of the alien facility. The beings who built it had faced their own crisis, their own choice between cooperation and destruction. The paired alcoves weren't just survival shelters, they were trust-building devices, designed to break down the barriers between different groups. They were refugees, Zara Kaithek realized, reading the deeper meaning in the alien symbols. Different tribes or species forced to work together to survive. and they discovered that the only way to truly survive was to trust completely. Jake added. The system around them stabilized completely, its blue glow indicating full acceptance. The mechanical guardians outside had returned to their dormant state, recognizing Jake and Zarakithek as authorized users of the facility, but more importantly, something fundamental had changed between the two survivors. The forced intimacy of the alien technology had stripped away 20 years of hatred and mistrust, revealing the shared pain and hope that lay beneath. Jake looked at Zarakithek, really looked at her, for the first time since they'd crashed. Her silver scales caught the alien light, and her 4 arms held him with a gentleness he'd never expected from someone who had sworn to hate his kind. "I'm sorry about your family," he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "I'm sorry." "About your sister," Zarakithek replied, her voice soft with genuine sympathy. The alien alcove hummed around them, maintaining the perfect environment for their continued survival. But both of them knew that something more important than survival had happened here. They had found something neither had expected: understanding, forgiveness, and the beginning of trust. Outside the chamber, the alien facility continued its patient wait, ready to shelter other refugees who might need to learn the same lesson. But inside the alcove, 2 beings from different worlds held each other, and 3 days passed in the alien chamber before they heard the sound of rescue ships overhead. Jake and Zarakithek had spent those days learning to work with the ancient technology, understanding how it functioned and what it was truly designed to do. The alien alcove had become more than just shelter. It had become a bridge between 2 very different beings. The rescue ships landed outside the canyon, their engines echoing off the stone walls. Jake and Zarakithek emerged from the chamber together, walking side by side as search teams entered the ruins. The rescuers stopped in surprise when they saw them, a human and a Veltar, working together as if they'd been partners for years. Captain Torres from the destroyed Harmony's Edge led the rescue team. His eyes widened when he saw Jake and Zarakithek standing together near the alien structures. Behind him, rescue teams from both human and Veltar fleets stared in amazement. "Morrison, thank the stars you're alive," Captain Torres said. "And Ambassador Zarakithek, your people have been very worried about you." Commander Velasque, the leader of the Veltar rescue team, approached with his 4 arms spread in a gesture of relief. "Ambassador, we feared the worst when we detected the ship's destruction. How did you survive?" Zarakithek looked at Jake, then back at her own people. "We worked together. We shared resources and knowledge to stay alive." The rescue teams exchanged glances. Cooperation between humans and Veltar was rare enough in formal diplomatic settings. Finding them working together after a crash was almost unbelievable. "The ruins," Jake said, gesturing to the alien structures around them. "They're not just archaeological sites. They're survival facilities designed by a species that understood something important about cooperation." Captain Torres studied the strange buildings with interest. "What kind of facilities?" "Trust-building systems," Zarakithek explained. "The beings who lived here faced their own crisis. Different groups had to choose between working together or dying separately. And they chose cooperation," Jake added. "They built these shelters to teach their people how to trust each other completely." Commander Velasquez's scales shifted color with skepticism. "You're saying ancient aliens built machines to create trust?" "Not create it," Zarakithek corrected. "Reveal it." The trust was already there, buried under fear and prejudice. The technology just helped us find it. The rescue teams began documenting the alien ruins while Jake and Zarakithek prepared for departure. But as they gathered their few belongings, both of them felt reluctant to leave. The chamber had become a place of safety and understanding, a refuge from the mistrust that waited for them in the outside world. "What happens now?" Jake asked quietly. "Now we go back to our separate worlds," Zarakithek replied. "You return to the Survey Corps and I return to the Veltar Diplomatic Service, and we pretend this never happened?" Zarakithek looked at the alien chamber where they'd shared their deepest fears and memories. "I don't think I can pretend anymore." The flight back to the orbital station was tense. Human and Veltar crew members watched Jake and Zara Kaithek with curiosity and suspicion. Seeing them work together so naturally challenged everything both species believed about their relationship. Admiral Chun, the human fleet commander, debriefed Jake privately in his quarters. "Morrison, I need to understand what happened down there. Your report mentions advanced alien technology and unprecedented cooperation with the Veltar ambassador." Jake chose his words carefully. "Admiral, we discovered something important. The ruins contain technology that could change how our species interact with each other." "Explain." "The ancient aliens face the same problems we do, different groups. Unable to trust each other, conflicts based on fear and misunderstanding. They solved it by creating systems that forced cooperation." Admiral Chun leaned back in his chair. "You're talking about mind control." "No, sir, I'm talking about understanding. The technology doesn't change what you think, it just lets you see the truth about others." Meanwhile, in the Veltar section of the station, Zara Kaithek faced similar questions from High Counselor Thekvar. Her superior's forearms gestured with obvious displeasure as he spoke. "Ambassador, your behavior has caused considerable concern. Working so closely with a human goes against everything we've taught you about their species." "High Counselor, I learned something important on that planet. The humans aren't what we thought they were. They are killers who destroyed your family, some of them are. But some of them are like Jake Morrison, people who carry the same pain we do, who want the same peace we do." High Counselor Thekvar's scales darkened with anger. "You've been compromised by extended contact with the human. We're removing you from diplomatic duties immediately." "You're making a mistake," Zara Kaithek said firmly. "The technology we found could end the mistrust between our species. The only thing it has done is corrupt your judgment." But Zara Kaithek wasn't ready to give up. That evening, she found Jake in the station's observation deck, staring out at the stars. He looked as troubled as she felt. "Your superiors aren't happy either," she observed, joining him at the window. "Admiral Chun thinks I've lost my objectivity." "He's probably right. Have you?" Jake considered the question seriously. "I've gained something more important than objectivity. I've gained understanding." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the ships from both fleets maintaining careful distances from each other. The mistrust that had driven them apart for 20 years was still there, stronger than ever. "We can't let this end here," Zara Kaithek said finally. "The alien technology, the knowledge we gained, it's too important to ignore." "What do you suggest?" "A joint research mission. We go back to the planet with teams from both species. We study the ruins properly, document the technology, prove that cooperation is possible." Jake turned to look at her. "Do you think they'll approve it? Not if we ask permission? But if we present them with a complete proposal, something they can't ignore. Over the next 2 days, Jake and Zara Kaithek worked together to create a comprehensive research plan. They documented everything. They'd learned about the alien ruins, the technology, and the potential benefits of studying them. More importantly, they proposed that understanding the ancient cooperation systems could help prevent future conflicts. When they presented their proposal to both command structures, the response was mixed. Some officials saw the potential value of the alien technology. Others worried about the risks of humans and Veltar working so closely together. Admiral Chun studied their proposal with obvious interest. "This technology you describe, it could have applications beyond diplomacy. Understanding how trust is built and maintained could help with crew integration, alliance building, conflict resolution." High Counselor Thekvar was less enthusiastic. "The risks are too great. Humans cannot be trusted with advanced alien technology." But Commander Velasquez, who had led the rescue mission, spoke up in support. "High Counselor, I saw them working together on the planet. Their cooperation wasn't forced or artificial, it was genuine." The debate continued for hours, with officials from both species arguing about the risks and benefits. Finally, Admiral Chun made a decision that surprised everyone. "We'll approve a limited joint mission. 6 months, small teams, strict protocols. Morrison and Ambassador Zarakaithek will lead the research. High Counselor Thekvar S. Scales flushed with anger. This is unacceptable. We cannot allow— Actually, Commander Velasque interrupted, we can. The potential scientific benefits outweigh the political risks. I support the mission. 6 weeks later, Jake and Zarakaithek stood together in the alien chamber once again. This time, they were surrounded by research teams from both species, humans and Veltar, working side by side to understand the ancient technology. The alien alcoves had been activated again, but now they were being used by voluntary pairs of researchers. Slowly, carefully, humans and Veltar were learning to trust each other in the same way Jake and Zarakaithek had. It's working, Zarakaithek said, watching a human engineer and a Veltar scientist emerge from one of the alcoves. Their previous suspicions replaced by understanding. Better than I hoped, Jake agreed. Look at them, they're actually talking to each other, sharing ideas. The research was progressing faster than anyone had expected. The alien technology was revealing secrets about cooperation and trust that neither species had understood before. More importantly, the human and Veltar researchers were forming genuine partnerships. As the sun set over the alien ruins, Jake and Zarakaithek walked together through the canyon where they'd first discovered the ancient structures. The mechanical guardians no longer attacked them. The defense systems had accepted them as part of the facility's purpose. Do you think this will really change things? Jake asked. Between our species? Maybe between us? Zarakaithek's scales shimmered in the fading light. It already has. They reached the entrance to their original shelter, the chamber where they'd first been forced to trust each other completely. The alien alcove still hummed with gentle energy, ready to shelter anyone who needed to learn the ancient lesson about cooperation. We should go back, Jake said. The research teams will want our report. In a moment, Zarakaithek replied. I want to remember this place as it is now, not a prison where we were forced together, but a bridge we